Yeah.
Move that table forward. Yeah.
So the final paper for the meeting this year is by Alex Levy, who's doing a PhD in religion at the University of Florida. His paper is entitled "The Absolute Concept: Schelling's Influence on Hegel."
What are you trying to just leave it right? Just go to the slideshow. There you go.
Kind of crooked, but
Perfect. It's absolutely.
okay. So my paper is called "The Absolute Concept: Schelling's Influence on Hegel." A couple of you gave talks on the Schelling-Hegel relationship, so I welcome your input on it. The phrase "the absolute concept" is from the phenomenology of spirit. And it can be compared to the phrase the identity of identity and non-identity, which Hegel uses in the difference between Schelling's philosophy. But I'll get to those first in a minute. Yeah. Okay. Hegel moved from Frankfurt to Jena in early 1801 to take up a teaching position at the city's university, which is the center of German idealistic philosophy. 1794, he gave a series of lectures there that were published as Foundations of the Science of Knowledge. Schelling read the work, and almost immediately after published Of the Eyes Principle of Philosophy. In a letter to Reinhold, Fichte describes the essay as a commentary on the science of knowledge. Schelling had been called to a professorship at Jena in 1798, and remained there until 1803, during which time he and Hegel co-edited the Critical Journal of Philosophy. And Hegel's first acknowledged publication was the essay entitled "The Difference Between Tradition and Schelling's Influence on Philosophy." It was published in late 1801 in the Critical Journal of Philosophy. Next. In Jena, Hegel wrote his most well-known work, Phenomenology of the Spirit. Hegel described the day that should have been the deadline for mailing the manuscript to the publisher as the day the French occupied Jena and the Emperor Napoleon penetrated its walls. He wrote to Schelling, "I actually completed the draft in its entirety in the middle of the night before the Battle of Jena." It was to be the first part of the System of Science, so that's the original subtitle. A book that I found helpful was The Future of Hegel by Catherine Malibu, and she writes of the system as a self. Self is a translation of Greek auto. Automatos means self-moving. Malibu says, if we consider its Greek etymology, the concept of automatism immediately reveals its speculative character. In fact, what automatos means is that which happens on its own. She says, the principle of simplification is actually the potential on which the automatism of the system draws. She adds, in speculative simplifications, the movement that dismisses the very intellectual faculties, consciousness, intellect, reason, which correspond with the chapters of clinical phenomenology, consciousness, self-consciousness, and reason, it originally made possible. So an 1807 exhibition in London included Mayerday's Automaton. It was built in 1800 by a Swiss mechanician named Mayerday. In 1807 was, of course, the year that phenomenology was published. And Mayerday's Automaton on the left there was the inspiration for the book The Invention of Hugo Cabret, which was adapted into the 2011 film Hugo, directed by Martin Scorsese. Another book that was helpful for me was Michael Forster's Hegel's idea of a phenomenology of the spirit. And Forster hypothesizes in part 4 is what the shift in the intended scope of the phenomenology took place during the process of composition, a shift from an originally planned phenomenology comprising just the chapters consciousness with reason to the published phenomenology. It's only in those that Hegel writes about the changeable shapes of consciousness that he mentions in the preface. Hegel complained to Schelling in a letter that unfortunate confusion governing the composition of the phenomenology for good reason. Forster's hypothesis allows me to interpret a small part of a large book, namely the chapters Consciousness or Reason. My interpretation centers on the chapter in the middle of those, the self-consciousness chapter. Okay, so an invocation of automatism is not tantamount to a denial of freedom. Automatos is understood in two ways: what happens by itself out of necessity, and what happens by itself yet by chance. The dialectical result of the mutual support of necessity and contingency is freedom. And freedom is important even to German ideas of philosophy, obviously. Okay, and yet another important book from me was Dialogue Young Hegel. He writes that prior to writing Phenomenology, Hegel was not yet capable of gathering his ideas together into a comprehensive unified system. But this is precisely what Schelling achieved, and moreover, he was able to present the system in an exceptionally brilliant and dazzling literary form. The Schelling system of transcendental idealism is what he's referring to, and it's a history of self-consciousness. In his lectures on the history of modern philosophy, Schelling calls the method he uses in the work the synthetic method to distinguish it from Hegel's dialectical method. And according to Michael Forster, in his essay, Hegel's Dialectical Method, in the difference essay, Hegel envisages the dialectical method being used in early logic directly modeled on Schelling's system of transcendental idealism, together perhaps with his philosophy of nature. Eventually, he gave up this early introductory logic and assigned the same functions to phenomenology. And the first moment of self-consciousness in the phenomenology is the infamous master-slave battle. This is Battle at San Domingo by the Polish artist Vladimir Skorolski, depicting the slave revolt on the island of Hispaniola, which led to the creation of the Republic of Haiti in 1804. Phenomenology was written in the first year of the Haitian nation's existence. Hegel and Haiti is an article by Susan Buck-Morse, published in 2000, and later turned into the book Hegel, Haiti, and Universal History, which was published in 2009. It's kind of the ugly duckling of books on Hegel. Hegel scholars generally don't think much of a reading of the phenomenology. I personally have a couple of big problems with it, but I'm not going to get into those. But at the very least, Buck-Morse is daring. No one has dared to suggest that the idea for the dialectic of worship and bondage came to Hegel in the years 1803 to 1805 from reading press, journals, and newspapers. Okay. I found that the problem with the body is one central to phenomenology. There's an article on Hegel and the body co-written by Judith Butler and Catherine Malibu, who wrote the Future of Hegel that I was talking about before. Commentators have remarked that the subject of the phenomenology has no body, and the title of the book is The Phenomenology of Spirit or Mind. Butler insists that the body is absent not only from the master-slave section, but from the whole book. Master and slave are described as opposed shapes of consciousness, after all. Malibu points out that there's a section devoted to the body, the one on the pseudosciences of physiognomy and phrenology. She says, in this section, we clearly see that the body is a shape. Okay. So on the left, we have a maniac, and on the right, we have a maniac cured. So you're supposed to be able to tell, just by looking at someone, what kind of person they are. And that's the pseudoscience of physiognomy. So for the physiognomist, a person's intention has its true expression in the shape of individuality. The shape of the body of an individual, and especially his face, are essential to the thinking of physiognomy. Hegel has a reputation for being obscure, but here he is not only being clear, he's also being witty. He says of physiognomy that should it declare a man that not his deed, but his face and lineaments are his real being, that it may expect to get a retort which demonstrates that the face can be an object for handling. So, punching someone in the face is the right response to telling them that you can tell what kind of person they are from the shape of their face. In other words, so contours of the skull are more permanent, which is why phonologists talk about the shape of a skull bone. So you're supposed to be able to tell what kind of person someone is by their skull. You take measurements of the craniometer, which is in the slide. This is what Hegel says. If a man is told that he is the kind of person he is because his skull bone is filled out in such and such a way, the retort here would, strictly speaking, have to go to the length of beating in the skull of anyone making such a judgment. Again, we can only speculate about why the phenomenology is how it is, but I want to underscore the importance of the historical context in which it was written, particularly the relationship with Schelling. That's it. Great.
I was wondering if you had any ideas about what Schelling's influence might be in anticipation of where
Well, I mean, it has a very, the system of transcendental idealism of 1800 has a very somewhat structured phenomenology of spirit, has a history of self-consciousness. And what I see in the phenomenology of spirit, which I don't really see in the system of transcendental idealism, like I said, is this problem of the body. I think Alan White, in his book Hegel and Problem of Metaphysics, brings out the absence of concern with this problem in the system of transcendental idealism pretty well. So I guess in a way of in the phenomenology of spirit, I think that Hegel sort of brings together the system of transcendental idealism with the philosophy of nature. I don't get so much into the philosophy of nature. That's in the observant reason section of the phenomenology, which I do treat in my